Welcome, everyone. I've been having such a good time. I'll start with introducing myself. My name is Amy Hinojosa, and I am a Kellogg alum and a very enthusiastic supporter of the annual symposium. I think it's the 15th year, and I've attended all of them and had been, a proponent of doing something digital, but I didn't know it would happen this way. So I'm so glad everyone is here, and I want to start by asking you all to make yourselves comfortable or even more comfortable, because we're going to talk about being human in the workplace. And, we've had a lot of practice with that in the last year. So I want to welcome Erica Keswin. She is the best-selling author of her first book, which was Bring Your Human to Work. And now we're lucky to have her today, right after the launch of her new book, which is called The Rituals Roadmap: How the Human Way to Transform Everyday Routines into Workplace Magic. So welcome, Erica. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. I'm going to start off by telling you that being on the analytics side and the business side, it is so fun for me to do this more human work, to do that, because we've come to understand certainly in the last decades or so that the soft stuff is really the hard stuff, right? And so I really enjoyed the book, and I know we're all familiar with really super personal rituals that translate into the workplace, like sharing a birthday cake. Everybody come to the break room, and it's Anne's birthday. And we know that builds community, but can you explain a little bit more about the business case for rituals? And, in the book, you talk about the 3 Ps, and I think that's really central.
Okay. All right, great. So hi, everybody. Kellogg grad. I graduated in 1995. And, it's funny, coming out of Kellogg, focusing on leadership and management and organizational behavior. Yes, the softer stuff, but my approach to this is to share the stories, but also the science behind why the softer stuff matters and the impact on the bottom line. And so in the book, I start off by talking about why should we even care about rituals at work and bringing your human to work. And I took a lot of the data and the science and created an equation that I call the 3 Ps of rituals. So what do rituals give us personally and at work? The first P is psychological safety, that rituals give us a sense of connection, a sense of belonging, which we know well before this pandemic were things that all leaders were thinking about and talking about, especially on the D&I side. The second P is that rituals give us an opportunity to connect to purpose. So purpose is P number 2, and it's purpose and values that, I'm sure everybody listening here today works for a company that says they have a list of values for their companies. But my focus is to get those values off the walls and into the halls. How do you bring those to life? And rituals are a way to bring those values and purpose so that people really feel and know what they mean. So psychological safety plus purpose, you add those together and you get increased performance. On the personal side, what does that mean? When we have rituals, our stress, our cortisol goes down, our oxytocin, our feel-good hormone goes up. From a business perspective, and those two are obviously interrelated, people that work for what we call high trust organizations are actually 47% more collaborative and 50% more productive. And so if you can come to work and not leave your true self at the door and bring your true self and have that sense of psychological safety, which we can get through rituals, businesses, it has a clear impact on the bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of that. And, again, the book was just released. We have a video clip of your tour, of the beginning of your tour, on the Kellogg Symposium website, so people can take a look at some of the video clips as well, see how exciting it is. I devoured every word, but before I started reading the book, what's the difference? Like, can you tell us a little bit about the difference between just a simple habit, a routine that we've developed for ourselves to just, make sure to get through our days productively, and what elevates something to a ritual?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's an important place to start. We can all be on the same page. So a ritual to me is something that it's to which we assign a higher level of meaning and value. Number one. Number two, it's something that happens with a regular cadence. It could be every morning. It could be every day. It could be every year. I was on a week ago, Sunday, was on MSNBC talking about inauguration rituals, and they have a cadence of every 4 years. The last piece of the ritual definition was really interesting to me as I began to study the science of rituals. And that is that a ritual is something that goes beyond its practical purpose. And so let's say I'm sitting here in New York City in my apartment, and let's say the lights go out and I light a candle so I can see you better. That's not a ritual. But if I light a candle every Friday at 5 o'clock to signify the end of the work week and the beginning of the weekend, I'm assigning more meaning and value, and I do it on a regular basis. There's no purpose. It's not for me to see. That is a ritual. And so that's what can make rituals magic. And again, some people are probably thinking magic at work, rituals, I'm not sure. And I know we'll get to this, but when they're really connected to values, there is this elevation of an experience. And that really is what a ritual, how it defines a ritual.
Yeah. And do you think that rituals become less important or more important as we've been isolated at home and we don't have, some of the traditional markers, right? The commute to work, which allowed you some time to transition between your home self and your work self. Can you talk a little bit about that and how to start thinking about re-implementing some new rituals?
Yeah. So I handed in the book, the manuscript for the book, on March 30th, about 2 weeks after I started quarantining with my family in Connecticut, and wondered what on earth is going to happen with this book. For those on the listening in that have written a book, you start working on it years before it actually comes out, and so I didn't know what to expect. What I began to see as I reached out to leaders that were in the book from all kinds of companies, from Starbucks to Chipotle to LinkedIn and Microsoft and small companies, big companies, everybody in between, was that rituals were really helping them personally and with their teams. And another part of the science of rituals is that it grounds us. It brings some order out of chaos, and especially the psychological safety piece. So the good news for me and the book is that I had some time to go back and interview leaders to ask them, how are they now thinking about rituals in the midst of the pandemic with everyone now at home? And, the second to last chapter in the book is called Designing Your Own Rituals Roadmap. And so, coming from business school, coming from Kellogg, you got to have some structure and a methodology around it. And so I think about rituals from two perspectives, really two roadmaps. One is personal. So think about a day in your life. Ask yourself, does your calendar reflect your values? How are you spending your time? And where are there opportunities for rituals? Beginning of the day, ending the day, transition from work to home, especially when we're all living and working in the same physical space. Rituals around taking a break. I think if we've learned one thing in 2020, it's that we can't sit on these computers all day, and we need to take breaks. From the work perspective, for especially a Kellogg crowd, people leading teams and companies, I want you to think about rituals, of course, as a human, but think about it in terms of the employee experience. Rituals around onboarding. I mean, how are you onboarding new people? And especially when you're not seeing them, how can you incorporate the values and make them feel connected and a sense of belonging, especially now? Meetings, a great opportunity for rituals. Celebrating milestones and birthdays and anniversaries and big wins and small wins. So all of those all formulate the chapters in the book. And so for a leader reading it, you kind of can dip into many of them, but that's how you begin to figure out, where might I start to think about either maintaining old rituals, or, to your question, think about, starting to create new ones as well.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you brought up the comment about aligning your calendar to your values, because that is something like I wrote down in like big red marker to go back and I started looking, and again, so much of calendar is sometimes imposed on you, right? People think that you're essential to some project or some meeting, and so this is a good time at the beginning of the year to take a look at that calendar and assess, okay, how much is it about you, and how much are you sort of pleasing others, and what time can you take back so that you realign to what you actually want to accomplish with what your best gifts are to the world. So I'm glad you brought that up. One of the stats, and again, you think you've heard of a stat, but this was startling to me, was you noted that over 70% of employees are thinking about leaving their current employer at any given time, whether they're thinking about it or actively looking. And I thought, wow, that's kind of an incredible number. And so one of the questions that I loved that you asked in the book, that you do as a strategist and business coach, is you ask both leaders and employees, what do your employees do that make them feel most like an employee of your specific company, not company A, B, or C? So it's not about skills, but what is it that makes them feel most like they belong to this unique constellation of individuals that makes up your organization? So you've mentioned some names of companies that you spoke to, Starbucks and from large to small, but can you give us some color on that? What did companies answer? What are some of the things they developed which says, you are here, you are an employee of Starbucks, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for asking that. This question, it took me a while to figure it out, because sometimes I would say, okay, Amy, in your team or your company, what are your rituals? And people weren't exactly sure. So that question, both personally and professionally, helped people get there, or even in your family, what makes my kids feel most like part of my family? So in the work front, there were some really fun answers, and I loved seeing the light bulb go off when I asked it. So for example, I asked Marisa Andrada, who's the head of human resources for Chipotle, that question. And her answer was, at Chipotle, employees feel most Chipotle-ish when at 10:15 in the morning, Chipotle opens at 10:30, which, by the way, I didn't know so many people wanted a burrito at 10:30 in the morning. I guess they do. And they get there at 6:30 and chopping up all the food and getting ready. But at 10:15, they all sit around the table. Now it's a little more distance than it was before, but they sit around and they have a meal together around the table. And that's one of the times. They had other rituals where they feel most, it's back to that psychological safety and belonging and feeling a part of something and remembering, why we do what we do. So that was one. Another really fun one was Allbirds, the cool felt sneaker booming startup. I asked one of the co-founders and the CEO, when did people feel most connected? And they have a really cool ritual called 40 at 4. And one of the things about rituals is that, they could be top down, they could be bottom up, they could come from the inside out. Sometimes they're started by an employee who left and the ritual has stuck. So you're never really sure. So this ritual is a fun one because it was very authentic and organic. An employee, not at the top, just, an employee was working there a number of years ago, went to the doctor and felt a little out of shape and set a goal for himself that he wanted to start doing push-ups, and getting into better shape. He set a certain goal for himself and he divided that number of push-ups by the number of days left in the year, and it came to 40. So every day at 4 o'clock, he would stop what he was doing at work and start doing 40 push-ups. The next thing, the guy next to him joined and the woman across the hall joined. And the next thing he knew, everybody was stopping and doing push-ups at 4 o'clock. And it became this ritual called 40 at 4. What I love about this example is there's a chapter in the book called the no smoke break. And many of us, at age 52, I certainly can remember people stopping. I was never a smoker, but like the smoke break. And that's where people bonded and hung out and got work done, because you and I would bump into each other at the smoke break, and I didn't need to call you 6 times later or send you a bunch of emails. So what I loved about 40 at 4 was that it was about so much more than the push-ups. Plenty of people did them. Some people stopped and watched the push-ups. And other people just like chit-chatted. And it was a time for people to connect and feel connected. I reached back out to them a couple of months ago to say, you must be really missing that. I mean, that's another piece of a ritual. You really miss it and feel a loss when it's gone. And they said that they were continuing it, and people would volunteer. They would make these videos. They would send them to everybody. In one video, people's personalities really came out. So one woman shared a video where she had her cat in her hands and was doing squats and arm lifts with her cat, and had a funny disclaimer, no domestic animals were hurt in the production of this movie. And again, a way to feel connected, a way to remember that you love what you do, your colleagues, and that you can't wait to be together in person someday.
Absolutely. And when you mentioned the smoke break, I immediately thought of the Friends episode with Rachel. Again, apologize if not everybody remembers it, but Rachel headed out with her boss and her colleague, and pretended to smoke because she just really wanted to be part of the group.
Right.
Where they did some of their most important, strategy discussions was at the smoke break. So yeah, I totally relate. The, when the pandemic hit and, rituals have changed, again, it was great that you came upon that one question that really allowed people to delve deeper and understand what a ritual was and how meaningful it was. And one of the key questions you ask is, if it went away, would you miss it? And so, I wonder, again, what are some of the things that people, are not necessarily able to recreate, but that they've modified. I'll tell you one personal one. For some of my nonprofit work is because we can only see, the top third of ourselves on these Zoom calls. People have started wearing silly hats. And again, it's just a way to take some of the stress away. And even if you're talking about, a P&L statement, but you'll remember that's, such and such wore that crazy red hat. So are there some new things you talk, for example, about, one that you experienced personally with the New York pandemic ritual at 7 p.m. every night. Talk to us a little bit about that and maybe some other examples.
Yeah. So as I said, we were quarantining in Connecticut, and I kept hearing about and reading about what was going on in New York City and many cities around the world, where everybody was getting together and clapping and yelling and banging pots and pans for the frontline workers. And I had to come back to the city to get some clothes at one point, and I got to experience it firsthand. And I really felt something. Like in that moment, it goes back to the 3 Ps. Like I remember I was sitting in my window and caught the eye of a person in the window, like across, it was such a New York City moment across the street. And everybody in that moment had a purpose. And our only purpose was to bang those pots and pans and thank those people who were on the front lines. And we felt part of New York City and trying to make it safe, and how everybody was wearing their masks. And it was really meaningful. I had a woman share with me the other day that she started a new ritual during that time where she would go jogging at 6:45 every night, so that when she was running through the streets of New York, it was if everybody was clapping and banging the pots and pans for her to cheer her on, as she ran. And so it really can be these little things that can make a difference. And I think there's silly things, and there's, ringing a chime before a meeting to settle people, doing a few breaks. I mean, Karen Coker just wrote in, there were some rituals that we did in our office that we thought were silly. And I am told, yes, I love this, that they are really missed now. For example, a win-win for negotiations or ringing a bell. So Karen, to that point, I just did an event with an organization the other day, and they used to have a gong. So one of the things I said to them was, You can still, get a gong. So when you get on your team meeting and everybody can share what their wins were, you can hit the gong, let's say as a team, maybe for 5 or 6 times for all the wins that week. Or the other thing that I thought could be really fun was everybody could do their own gong or hit a pot and pan in their own house, take a picture. If you have kids, they could take a picture of you on your Slack channel or whatever you use for messaging. You could share the photos. I think when we think about these silly rituals, I think it's really a great idea to leverage different mediums. So do them on Zoom, but how can we also tap into other types of technology to make people feel connected? I do want to mention, though, I think there's the fun, silly ones, but then there's also checking in. And I want to mention it because I've seen this crazy trajectory, which is in the beginning, we needed to make sure our employees were safe, that their technology was working. These basic, in the Maslow, in the hierarchy of needs. I mean, let's make sure everyone is safe, has food, water, and that our technology is working. Can we continue to do our jobs when we are home? We figured out that we could, and that's a whole separate conversation about when we start to go back to work. And I think that there's going to be really great things that come out of that. Then I would say a few months later, the check-ins were maybe 20 minutes of a 45-minute meeting because, people had family members that were sick and a lot going on. Then came the summer, then it was September, and we have kids that are still home. So people's emotions are very up and down, and we need to remember that. I mean, the most recent milestone that I have been feeling is we had New Year's, and all of a sudden it was 2021, and sadly, other than, and this won't be a political conversation, but other than some major changes, in terms of the pandemic, for most people, not much changed, and people are having a really hard time. So I would urge all of you with your teams to continue to check in. However, it's not realistic to think that you can continue to check in for 20 minutes of your 45-minute meeting. So what can you do? Some ideas that have been working for people include everybody in your team go around the room and the Zoom room and share one adjective for how they're feeling in that moment. One other CEO shared, red light, green light, yellow light, and here's why this is the impact on the business. Sort of, this is where the rubber hits the road. If you have a ritual where everybody feels comfortable sharing, like if I come in and I'm like, red light, we're not going to get into why, but what that does, if Amy's running our team meeting, is that clearly there is something going on with me. And if I'm the one on the line for a major deliverable that day, you can follow up with me later, have a conversation, give somebody on the team, some part of my work, have someone help me. But if we don't know, then we're not going to be able to do it. So we can use rituals to get information to help people, but also help our business. And I know this is a very long answer to your question, but I want to add one more thing because it's connected more to my first book, which is Bring Your Human to Work. The leaders who are doing this the best and that are getting the most mileage and actually having this work for them are where people feel safe and comfortable to share how they're really doing. Like if I'm having the crappiest of all days and I don't feel comfortable telling Amy that I am, none of this is going to work. So if you're listening to this and you're a leader, I feel like the North Star of what you could be doing right now is not only leading with empathy, but leading with vulnerability. If you as a leader are comfortable sharing, one of your bad days or, because many of the junior people assume that, they're just dealing with all this stuff, like that you're the boss and you're all buttoned up and, you don't have the craziness. But if you can share it and be open, I am telling you, it is the impact and the engagement and the connection just goes through the roof. And it's being human. You may not be able to do a 180 right now, but even an incremental shift can really make a difference. So I apologize for the long answer, but I wanted to share that.
No, that was wonderful. And again, and connecting it, back to your first book. And I think I started that talk by saying, it's took a while, since my early Kellogg days, but there's finally, again, really hard data. Yesterday, one of our presenters talked about the Google findings related to psychological safety, and that, you know, they looked at all of the traits that their most high-performing teams had, and again, took a look at thousands of variables, and psychological safety came to the top.
Yep.
And so it's important then that you connected that in your book, that the reason rituals matter is not just a feel-good exercise, but that it actually does contribute in all sorts of ways to the bottom line, starting with recruitment and retention, and being able to tell, you know, the narrative of your organization in a very specific way, so that it's not generic, so that you don't go, well, I could do the same, you know, thing, whether you're an accountant or an engineer or an app developer at X company for a few more dollars, but that it becomes glue, right? So the answer was very much appreciated. One of the things that I'd be remiss if I didn't have you touch on, although you talk to a lot of corporate organizations, you also talk to Northwestern, and I wasn't lucky enough to be part of that tradition, because I didn't go to Northwestern for my undergrad. I went for my MBA, and I was part of the evening program. But now, just reading about it makes me want to go back and do it. So can you tell us a little bit about the famous Northwestern Arches tradition, and especially the fact that it's not hundreds of years old, and the power of bookends, because you talked about it as an onboarding, but also graduation.
Yeah. So in the book, and again, personally and in our work lives, rituals around beginnings and endings are what I call prime rituals real estate. That these are great opportunities to make people feel connected. And when I started writing this book, it was so funny. I had multiple people say to me, you know who's obsessed with rituals? It's Morty Shapiro at Northwestern. So I was like, all right, I had never met Morty, and I reached out, and he got back to me. And I happened to be out there, and I got to sit down with him to hear about the rituals. And he's in the book a couple of times. So what he shared with me, coming from Williams College, an East Coast institution that is hundreds of years old, steeped in rituals. He got to Northwestern, and he sat down with the staff and was like, okay, guys, what are some of the rituals? And there weren't a lot of long-standing rituals. He did uncover, some with the painting of the rock. And I know many of us went to Kellogg, so we weren't as connected. Part of what Morty also did was to integrate Kellogg more into all of Northwestern.
Right.
One of the many amazing things that he's done for the school. So he was sitting there and he was brainstorming. He said, I think we should have a way to welcome students. So he came up with something called March Through the Arch. And he talked about how, now it's only 9 years old, but he started it in the first year, and probably 50 students showed up. And the idea was, when you're beginning your Northwestern career, you're going to march through the arch. And he didn't talk to the town of Evanston. He didn't close the roads. So these 50 kids are like running and weaving in and out of the cars. I was just picturing it, kind of cracking up as he was saying it. The next year, more came. By the third year, all 2,000 kids were marching through the arch. And for those of you now, like if you look on the Instagram or even do hashtag March to the Arch, it is a thing that it is. And I have friends whose kids have gone, the parents are there. There's so many people that you're told like exactly when your kid is going to march through the arch in the sea of purple so you can get the perfect photo. And one of the stories in the book is that a kid in the class was chatting with Morty, and Morty said to him, what was your favorite part of Northwestern in your experience here? And this student said to Morty, it has to be the March to the Arch. I just felt so good connecting with something that everybody had done before me. And then there's a quote, and Morty said, I didn't have the heart to tell the poor kid it was only the third year. And it was just such this moment when I was with him, like goosebumps hearing this story, and it highlights the impact of rituals. It doesn't have to cost anything. It's intentional. It's meaningful. There's no practical purpose. Going back to your question about the definition. I mean, there is no practical purpose to walk through an arch, but the impact on the parents and the kids. So this other part, which is not in the book, and now I don't think this part, I don't know, it's like been crazy. So maybe you'll be getting a little sneak peek, but Morty also has brought in that at the end of your 4 years, you march out through the arch, and that it's not 100% of the kids, but it is sort of a work in progress to get the bookends. But this is a crazy part of the story. I have it when I do talks for companies, I have it in my talk. So I was looking on the Northwestern website and the March to the Arch, and last June, when there was no graduation, this is such a crazy story. There was a guy whose sister was graduating from Northwestern, and he also was a woodworker. And to surprise her in her backyard, he built a replica of this arch. It was like 19 feet high.
Oh.
And he built it. And she had some of her friends there, and they're in the caps and gown, they're playing the music, and they literally marched back to the arch in their driveway. And
that's wonderful.
I know, right? It's like you get tears, seriously, when these rituals really mean something. And part of the definition, how do you know if it's a ritual? One, you really miss it when it's gone. And the lengths that people will go to maintain their rituals is unbelievable and really powerful.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. Absolutely. Again, the fact that she hadn't experienced it and that he went to those lengths to recreate that for her, that's very, very meaningful. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is, and particularly, sort of jumping off of the Northwestern Arches story, because some people thought it'd been around hundreds of years, and in fact, it was a newly created ritual. Is what's your experience of, whether companies already have hidden rituals? Like, did you help them uncover some of the rituals that already existed, but that they didn't recognize as rituals, and so thought they either didn't have any that that they could really hang their hat on and elevate into an organizational ritual? Like, I start thinking about, like, where does this come from? Is it organic? Is it the receptionist? Is it HR? Is it the CEO? Like, does it have to be organic? Tell us a little bit about that.
It can be from anywhere. I mean, it's top down, bottom up, inside out. It could be from a client. So I think it's part of it is this awareness of saying, wow, that's a ritual. When do people at LinkedIn feel most LinkedIn-ish? It's asking that question. I mean, I had this happen yesterday. I did a strategy session with a law firm, and it goes back to people are like, they're bummed. Like, this law firm just realized that their new incoming class of associates, and the banks are feeling it too, they're going to be fully remote even this summer. And it's like a bummer. So what can we do? So we have 20 different partners on the call. We were talking, and all of a sudden one partner would say, oh, you know what? We should bring back lunch with a legend, where the new associates would have lunch with like a senior partner with who had a real personality.
Oh, lunch with a legend?
It was called Lunch with a Legend. And I think it was elevating something we did to, wow, this is a ritual and there's meaning around it. And then somebody else chimed in and said, you know what I really miss? When we did a deal, we would get these deal toys. The partner would give everybody a gift or a toy. And so I'm sitting here, I'm like, well, that's kind of easy. You get the toys, you ship them to their house. Like, who doesn't want to get a gift right now when you're sitting at home? And then on top of it, what you can do, right? I'm going to send you a gift, Amy. And then what you do is you tell all of these associates to, like, get the gift, take a picture of the gift, and put them on the intranet and figure out ways to have fun with it. But right, it's that elevation. We miss this, and can we maintain it? Can we do something new? And so, yeah, I think it's my hope with this book is people ask themselves this question about, what are rituals in my life, personally, professionally? What can I bring back? What am I already doing? And almost elevate it to ritual status and look at the impact that it has.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the, I know you're busy on the tour for this book, but one of my hopes for you is that you go back and make the pandemic rituals that much richer, because we might be in it for a while longer. And I think, again, just to sort of give people a sense of calm and a sense of we'll get through this.
Yeah.
They need more things to hang on to. So I have just this week I have both an onboarding for a new executive and I have another executive leaving. And so, out of nowhere, again, like 1,000 little apps sprang up that allow you to sign digital cards, that allow you to do little video montages, which are not the same, right? That it can never replace, true human contact, but they will do, right? They will get us through,
Yes.
so that the person still feels that, that we did something to acknowledge their contribution, that we did something to acknowledge that they are a new person in our organization that is going to matter. So I think, I'm going to, just start sending them your way and hope you publish something more. I'm giving you homework.
All right. No, I mean, look, I agree. It is going to continue in different ways. And, one of the things for people listening, I mean, I love all these amazing questions and comments. Anyone who ever wants to talk about this stuff, I'm all ears. And I'm thinking a lot about what's next. And this, I'm calling it the hybrid revolution. I think next season of my podcast, I'm going to interview people about this hybrid revolution. Remote work's not going away, and I think remote work is great, but maybe rituals can be some of the glue, because some might be at home, some might be at work. I mean, I think this pandemic has changed everything, and there could be some really positive things that come out of it, but without being intentional, I think we're going to fall back into some of our old ways.
Yeah, I think one of our earlier speakers today talked about, just sort of the continuing arc of technology, and that although, we feel so strongly that we want to get back to, quote unquote, normal, that, that we won't, right? And there's, all sorts of commercial real estate, white papers and all sorts of, McKinsey white papers that say, not quite, we won't, that it will be different, that you called it the hybrid revolution, and that's, a great title for your next book. And so, we look forward to that. But yeah, I think it's important to sort of look forward, and rituals is a great connector. One of the things I want you to touch on for the group is, you talked about sort of the place where you're most ready to receive, and where you're most open to becoming part of the group, which is onboarding is certainly a key opportunity. But talk about the arc, so if you're going to be with an organization, whether you're there for, 2 months or 2 years or 20 years, what are some other, opportunities, and why is it important to not just have it be part of onboarding?
You mean in terms of sort of re-recruiting people as when they're there?
Yeah. So let me ask it another way, because this is something I was thinking about as I was reading your book, and again, trying to think of, different size organizations, from 100 people to the Starbucks International, and how you feel it applies to, like, is it most relevant when it is, like at a team level? Is it most relevant when it's, an HR initiative? Is it most relative when it's from the CEO? And then kind of timing of those things, because you also don't want it to feel, like corporate mandate, right? These are things that are supposed to make you feel connected and good. And so if you were, when you go in and you give advice, like, what's your step one? Is it, in your discovery process? You walk in and I say, yep, I either read your book or I understand the concept, and I do think that it will add to my bottom line. Where do you start? Like, how do you start that conversation?
Yeah. So some of the best rituals they're aligned with the company's values. And which just sort of threads the needle. So, I was talking this morning, if you have a group all around the world, I mean, teams are global and there's different practices and different things. I mean, I do think you can rotate time zones and there are practical aspects of these rituals, but in terms of the threading of the needle and what connects us, ideally it's those 5 values, 3 values, 6 values, however many. I'm a big fan of having, for the record, no more than 6 or 7, otherwise people don't remember what they are. So I would start with those values. I do believe that there are opportunities to make your rituals your own within your team. And so doesn't always have to be company-wide or division-wide. If you're a manager, to ask the people on your team, what makes people on your team feel most part of this team? So typically it's a combination of the team level, the department level. Maybe there are some things, maybe there's a big annual event that you can't even imagine your company not having, and that's a company-wide ritual. But I do think at all these different levels, it works. It's just the most organic when it's linked to the values, assuming that the values are the right values, or not the right values, that they are, strong values. Not, there are certain companies, for example, when Uber, before when Travis was the CEO, there was a lot of articles, I'm sure many of you have seen, about the Uber values. There were 14, there were way too many, and they weren't the right ones. I mean, they actually led people to certain kinds of behaviors that we really didn't want. And so this all assumes sort of the values that connect people, that do the right things. Rituals are best really weaved into those values.
Yeah, I love that. And now that you said it, I remember that super important connector in the book, that the more that they're aligned to values, the more it does 2 things, right? It gets the company's purpose. It brings it to life, right? So it brings it to life in ways that are meaningful to the employee base, and that doesn't have to do it, again, it doesn't necessarily have to do with their function, right? So that it becomes a connector across departments as well. So whether I'm in accounting or sales and marketing, these rituals that bring the values to life also serve to connect me. I had, one of my favorite was working here for many years for a local newspaper. If you asked everybody what they did, again, they would not say, I work in accounting or I'm in marketing. Instead, they said, I save democracy every day, right? And so that, again, not only did that, bring it way beyond, if you were going to process an invoice, that's what you have to do. But if you're saving democracy because you're supporting the business that way, wow, now you're a superhero. Now you're going to, give it your 1,000%. So yeah, so thank you for that answer. One of the questions I have here from a Tiffany Golston is she, this is I think, I can certainly relate. This, how do you create rituals for new teams where trust is still being established and the majority might be a little introverted? So I think that, because we've talked about more, fun stuff, if you have an introverted team, would you make any changes?
So introverts, I like to give them a heads up of what's coming. So with that example of checking in and giving people, like letting everybody know that you're going to go around and everybody's going to have to give an adjective to describe how they're feeling in that moment. If you're an introvert, it's nice to know the day before that that's happening so they can have an answer. Also for introverts, you want to make sure that everyone participates. They often don't want to go first. They definitely want to go last. So I think the more planful and the more intentional you can be to think through all of the different kinds of people you have on your team. What this question also connects to is just in general, do rituals help companies be more inclusive, or could they have the opposite effect? And, and so really important question. And I know as leaders on this call, it's something that even pre-pandemic, we're thinking a lot about diversity and inclusion. And what I would say is that it could go either way. And that's why you really need to think about this from an intentional perspective. So for example, If you're thinking through this question of when do people feel most like my company, and it's always, always, always at the bar and at happy hour. There are people that don't drink, don't want to drink,
Right.
don't drink for religious reasons. There are, if you, of all of your activities are after 5 o'clock, that might not work for people with young children or people taking care of elderly parents. Especially now, the workday is going like this. It didn't end at 5 before with the increase in technology, and it certainly doesn't end now. And so if you really value some of the things that we've been talking about, do it over lunch, do it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, where we want people to come together and connect, not always around alcohol, not always, after work. A crazy example that I kind of laughed and I thought this is the most pathetic thing I've ever heard, that someone shared with me recently, was that at a law firm, there was a group of senior leaders who got together. It was a new pandemic ritual because nobody was leaving the house, and they decided to have a contest around growing their facial hair. And every week they would come together and compare, how fast. And my husband actually would be good at that because he can grow a beard pretty quickly. Lo and behold, they hadn't really thought it through because the woman on the team didn't think that was such a great idea. Right? But unintended consequences. You got to really think these things.
Absolutely. And that's, it's, so to your point, it's good to, check in with a few folks that are different among your team and say, does this feel good to everyone? Does this feel, inclusive versus exclusive? And so, I'm glad, all sorts of organizations are being more sensitive to that. Thank you for mentioning that. I think the way that this tech platform works is that we actually sort of get abruptly cut off at some point for the next speakers to prepare, and I don't want that to happen to you or us, for the audience as well. So I have to ask you this, and so forgive me if I'm delving a little bit too far back in your bio, but one of the things I loved learning about you is that you're a lifelong connector, and I can tell because we're in little boxes miles and miles away from each other, and yet I feel very connected. So as a lifelong connector, you've been an executive recruiter in your past, which doesn't surprise me at all, and then but you've also been a marriage matchmaker. So you also found connections in love for, I'm sure, a lot of happy people out there. So with, Valentine's Day coming up, what advice might you have for some of the folks in the room and for them to pass along in the age of pandemic? What should we do for Valentine's Day? What rituals can we establish as new? And, what can we do?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. I mean, I think it can be these very small things that can make a big impact. And so think about the people important in your life, and maybe a Valentine's Day in the past, and maybe there's something that you can get and you can ship to them that reminds them of that moment, a place where you went together. I mean, none of us are traveling right now. So, maybe if you used to go to Florida and you could buy a bunch of Florida orange, they're just trying to be creative and use this as an opportunity to let that person know, what, I'm really thinking about you. We can't physically be together, but I've spent the time thinking about what really would make you happy in this moment. And for many people, it's, the thought that counts, and, maybe send a gift in the process. I will qualify with this. I never was professionally paid for my work as a matchmaker. It was more of a side hustle in my matchmaking world. But, I've just in general always been a connector of people, a connector of ideas. And it's one of the things I love the most about this and about Kellogg was the people that I met and that I was able to connect with. I still keep in touch. I actually have a ritual, a good friend of mine from Kellogg. We were in Section 67 together, and we walk around the New York City Reservoir. We met yesterday and did it. And it's this community that we need to remember that we're all here for each other to help us during these crazy times, whether it's personal, whether it's work. And so I just want to thank you for having me to be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We thank you so much for your time, and we wish you all the success in the world. And I'm going back to read your first book and look forward.
Yeah, you know what? I have it here. The Here's Rituals Roadmap. I know you have. Oh, you have it, and this one's bringing you to work.
Yes.
Yeah, and be in touch. You know, I would love to hear from people. So you can find me on my website. I do a monthly newsletter, a monthly-ish newsletter, typically once a month. Lately, it's been a little bit more, but as you'll see, I respond. So if you reach out, you will hear back from me.
Erica, thank you once more. Appreciate you.
All right, take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for all your comments in chat, and reach out if you have any follow-up questions for Erica. We're happy to address. And you'll also see my name in the daily surveys that I send out. So please do answer the surveys. We really do use them to plan programming. We hope to be in person again next year, and for our out-of-town friends to join us digitally. Thank you again, Erica.
All right, bye guys.